And welcome to a brand new life, to a brand new day, all the way from the wastelands of California. My name is Michael, and I'm a mere figment of your imagination. Hello to you on YouTube. I look forward to once again serve you those sounds of salvation. You can find the podcast version of this program by searching End of Days on all popular media platforms or go to michaeldeacon.com for further assistance. Here we are again, gentlemen, for another very special edition of the Michael Deacon program. Joining us this evening is Dr. Michael Aquino, former Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino, with an extensive list of accolades. He is a graduate of the Industrial College of the Armed Forces, National Defense University, Defense Intelligence College, U.S. Army Intelligence School, and the U.S. Army Space Institute. He is also the founder of the Temple of Set and author of various books, like the book of Coming Forth by Night, Mind War, Mind Star, and Find Far. Hello, boys and girls. Welcome back yet again on this very, very special edition of the Michael Deacon program. Mike Hideous draws assignment tonight as he joins me to host tonight's show. Let's bring him in here. Let me unmute him. 1 second, boys. Mike, are you alive?
I am, yes.
Fantastic. I'm glad you're here. I'm thrilled to share the air with you yet again. These sessions are always priceless, my friend.
Nice to hear your voice, Michael. Always a pleasure. Is Dr. Aquino on as well?
Yes, let's bring him in. And Doctor, are you there?
I am here, and thank you for the re-invitation.
Oh, yes. How are you doing, Michael, by the way? I'm glad to hear your voice as well.
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Very good. I was just in France a few days ago. I got really cold. I saw some wood and started a fire. Next thing I know, it's on the news.
Uh-oh.
Aside from that, I'm doing pretty well out here.
What is wrong with you?
I know. I started off on the wrong note, didn't I? Kind of heavy there.
You're really off the rocker today, I'll tell you.
I know. I am very awful tonight. But aside from that, we've got a plethora of topics tonight, gentlemen. A new audience will be listening in. And as we begin, I just wanted to mention that it's always an honor to speak to both of you guys, both Dr. Aquino and Mike Hideous.
Thank you, Michael.
Yes, no
Yes,
doubt.
and thank you.
Yes, and Mr. Aquino, I wanted you to take us back down memory lane for the newer souls out there. I'm curious, what was a young 18-year-old Michael Aquino like?
Well, let's see. A young 18-year-old Aquino would have been back in the mid-1960s, 64, 65. I graduated from the University of California at Santa Barbara with a bachelor's degree at age 21 in 1968. So you can sort of pin that on the calendar. And at that point in time, intellectually, philosophically, I would have called myself a sort of a casual existentialist without any strong feelings in terms of metaphysics or religion one way or the other. I had never been interested in conventional religions, feeling them to be mostly the fairy tale sort of thing, maybe good for metaphor and for teaching purposes, but in the same sort of vein as Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny. But I certainly didn't have any strong likes or dislikes. At that point, as I said, I was just taking things as sort of a day at a time in the atmosphere of the 1950s, sort of an Eisenhower kid, you might say. And the directions began to change a little bit in 1968 when I happened to bump into Anton LaVey and the Church of Satan, somewhat accidentally, because I had gone to see the premiere of the movie of Rosemary's Baby, and as I was coming out of the early show, there was quite a sensation while he and his entourage showed up in a black Cadillac hearse and swept dramatically into the theater to see the later show. And of course, I asked the manager, WTF was that, so to speak? And
yes.
he said in a sort of an awestruck voice, that was Anton LaVey, and those were members of the Church of Satan here in San Francisco. And I said to myself, yeah, Church of Satan, a real one, right here in San Francisco. Wouldn't you know it? I didn't have anything to do with it for about the next year or so because I was busy in the 82nd Airborne Division and then in the Green Beret course back at Fort Bragg. But when I came back to San Francisco a short time before I went off to Southeast Asia, I had the opportunity to visit a couple of lectures that were given by Anton, and he struck me as a very, very wise and a very introspective individual with a good sense of humor, but also a strong sense of social morality. And that might make you, sort of take you aback for a moment and say, what? Anton LaVey, a sense of morality? But in the late 1960s, 68, 69, we were living in a very amoral time. This was the time of the Vietnam protests and the civil rights issues and a good deal of conflict and argument in normal societies about what constituted morality. And the conventional churches weren't showing anybody anything very impressive at that time, nor did we seem to have much of a consensus on a social morality in the United States. Everybody was pontificating at each other's throats. And in other words, it was not too dissimilar from the way things are right now.
Yeah.
With our politicians all posturing and preening like a bunch of bantam roosters. And here was a person who said, the essence of responsibility is individualistic. You have to start by taking it for yourself, and you have to start by the situations that you live in personally, and you have to behave in a way that brings, pride and justice and honor upon yourself. And if you're going to be a bad boy or a bad girl, then okay, you can do that too, as long as you take responsibility for that. But what you can't do is blame it on society or your parents or the devil made me do it,
right,
or something like that. If you're going to be bad, go ahead and be bad, and then own up to it and say, okay, I was bad. And then if you want to spank yourself, okay. If not, that's something you're going to have to deal with in the mirror every night. So that element of honesty was what actually attracted me to Anton and the Church of Satan back in those days, together, of course, with the notion that here was an opportunity to explore what I thought were the unanswered mysteries of human existence. This is what the whole interest in black magic and these great hidden secrets of the universe were all about. So those two factors were what convinced me that here was something I wanted to be a part of and join in explorations with. So
Understood.
That's what made me join.
Understood. And do you recall what your parents' first initial reaction when they realized that their baby boy was now a Satanist?
Sure. My father was a Roman Catholic, but a very casual one. He never tried to browbeat me into it. My mother, very interesting individual. She was sort of a phenomenon in her own time. She had an IQ of 189, was written up in Ripley's Believe It or Not, went through homeschooling at a blistering rate of speed, and graduated from Stanford University, summa cum laude, in 3 years by age 17. And she was, as you may imagine, also totally uninterested in conventional religious pablum. When she decided that she'd marry my father, she looked around for an appropriately interesting social church to get married in and settled on the Swedenborgian Church in San Francisco, which was sort of an artistic gesture, part of the arts and crafts movement. Beautiful place. It's a little bit like the Grand Californian Hotel in Disneyland, if you want to use that metaphor. So they married for the atmosphere in that church. And again, neither one of them was concerned about me in the Church of Satan. Mom said, "That's interesting. Let me know how it works out." Dad said, "That's interesting. Let me know how it works out." And that was it. They had both met Anton. They liked him. They didn't think he was a crackpot or a crank.
I got to say, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I got to say I'm fascinated. Sure. I'm fascinated by the fact that your parents didn't have what I would expect to be the typical Roman Catholic surprise. I mean, it's completely blasphemous. You know?
Yeah.
Well, let me tell you about Roman Catholicism in Italy.
Yes.
See, my father was, his family immigrated from Calabria in Italy, and the Italians take their Catholicism kind of the way we in the United States take an old pair of Levi's that we've worn in. They don't get all uptight about it. It's a casual, friendly thing. If you see the Godfather movies, you'll get some idea, or maybe I should say a Fellini film would be a little better. The priest in the local town there in Cosenza was a really dashing Marcello Maestriani figure who had a really torrid affair with my grandmother while my grandfather was out here in Portland, Oregon, getting the family ready to immigrate to the United States. And he remained a great friend of the family all through life. Later on, he visited Dad in Santa Barbara, and we went out to dinner together. He was a very elegant Italian priest, elder gentleman. So
very interesting.
I said it's a casual, friendly way. It's not all uptight like you see them in The Exorcist or something.
Understood. And I was only asking because I've known numerous atheists and Satanists who kept it under wraps for a while before ever even disclosing that sort of thing to their parents, especially those who, I guess you could say, they had one of those traditional upbringings with religion. And
my parents sent me around to the usual round robin of Sunday schools to see if any of them would take, and I was bored, so they didn't press it. I went to a Boy Scout troop and got my eagle in it that met at a Presbyterian church in San Francisco and had a Jewish scoutmaster. My first wife was a Mormon, and we got married in a Baptist church in Sausalito.
Wait a minute. I don't remember hearing this part. Tell me about this Mormon.
Yes, well, Janet, my former wife, my late former wife, we actually met each other when we were about a year or two old because our parents had known each other at San Francisco.
Okay.
So I used to punch her out, when we were 2 or 3 years of age, and then I took another look at her as a teenager, and she looked a little different, and one thing led to another, and so we got married.
Oh my!
And she was about as her family had moved to Utah, where her father was the publisher of the local newspaper in Provo. And so she, of course, was exposed to the very strong Mormon culture of those days, but it never took with her either. So she shrugged it off, again, kind of like I did the Easter Bunny.
Interesting. I never knew that.
Yeah, she went on to become a priestess of the Church of Satan, and very well liked it too.
Your former wife became wait. Is that what you just said? Your deceased wife?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
She became a member of the House of Satan. The Church of Satan. Oh, I didn't know that either. I mean, I knew of your current wife
Lilith,
and her role in the Church of Satan, and then of course in the Temple of Set. But I did not know your first wife was also involved in it as well.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yes, Janet was a priestess in the church at the same time that I was first a priest and then a master, and we were running the Church's Grotto in Louisville, Kentucky, and at that time Lilith had started and founded the Church's Grotto in New York City. That's how we eventually all met in 1972.
Oh, okay. Very interesting. And I was going to ask this question much later, but since we are on this topic, and I know we've rehashed this a couple times, but I'm not quite sure if I even remember asking it this way, but one of the listeners, this is a woman, by the way, she seems to be very obsessed with Lilith. And anytime,
so am I.
Well, of course, but she's very interested in knowing how you met your wife, Lilith. And she's also asking if she's okay.
Lilith is in absolutely wonderful shape. She and I first met in 1972 when, at that time, as I said, I was the senior master of the church in the eastern United States, and the church was going to have its third regional conclave out there in New York City, and Lilith was putting it together as the grotto leader of the Lilith Grotto in that city, which was the main grotto there. So we met at that time and stayed in correspondence and friendship, thereafter.
Very cool.
Nice.
Very nice. And yes, I'm glad to hear that everything's good with Lilith. I know I always ask you about her because the people want to know. They are very, again, mostly women are the ones who always ask about her.
Lilith is just quite frankly breathtaking. I mean, she looks the same now as she did at age 29.
She's a lovely woman. Yeah, she's a very lovely woman.
And she's very
a lucky man, Doctor.
She's very active as in animal rescue and animal sanctuary interests and activities worldwide through her Arche element of the Temple of Set, which is an animal activist element of it, and just going like a house of fire.
Very nice. And of course, going back to 1968, that's when you received your BA in political science. And we'll talk a little bit about politics a little bit later here, but I wanted to ask you, by 1968, you were ready to take on the world, correct?
Well, yes, I had decided that I was going after a military career, and I actually had a nomination to West Point, and I also had a Department of the Army scholarship to any other university that I cared to. And after taking a look at West Point and deciding that it had two strikes against it, it was very cold in the winter and it didn't have any girls at that time. These were both pretty awful, So
right.
I opted for Southern California, beach, surf, lots of girls, and the pleasantness of the University of California at Santa Barbara. So I went through there. I graduated as what's called a distinguished military graduate, which is a Department of the Army designation that puts you on the same level as a West Point graduate with a regular Army commission, not a reserve one, in armor branch. That was my original branch. But then I very quickly decided that I wanted to emphasize psychological operations, which I had first begun to study long distance from Fort Bragg while I was still a cadet, because psychological operations, or PSYOP as we call it, has this very interesting attribute that it tries to win both battles and wars by persuasion and manipulation of people rather than by putting bullets or bombs in them. And this struck me as a rather good idea. I don't like hurting people. I don't like blowing things up and causing misery. I would much rather convince people to come around to my way of thinking if I can. And therefore, that became my field of specialization in the Army for the next 35 years.
Understood. And that must have been such a fun time for you back in 68 out here in California. It's very hard to leave California for whatever reason, especially the Santa Barbara area. Beautiful there.
Well, the nerve center of PSYOP in the United States, there were two of them at that time. For the military, it was Fort Bragg, North Carolina, the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center.
Right.
And otherwise, the peacetime proponency for black propaganda or black PSYOP was at that time the Central Intelligence Agency, up in Langley. And for white propaganda, the pleasant stuff, it was what was then called the United States Information Agency in Washington, D.C., which has since been absorbed into the State Department. So I worked primarily out of Fort Bragg because I was obviously on the military side of things, and occasionally with the Central Intelligence Agency and the USIA. The military has proponency for all three kinds of PSYOP, but in wartime, whereas those civilian agencies have it for peacetime. So that was sort of how it got divided down the middle. So when I went, for example, over to Southeast Asia, countries that I was in over there, since we were at war, it was a sort of a dual hat thing where I worked both with the military side of things and the civilian side of things.
Yes, and what year exactly were you in Vietnam?
69.
69, right? Okay. Now that must have been a very interesting time as well. The last time we talked, we briefly talked about Operation Wandering Soul, which is amazing. Can you tell the newer listeners briefly about that, Doc? And Mike, I'm not quite sure if you ever remember hearing Dr. Aquino describe some of that.
Oh, sure.
No, I haven't.
Your listeners can, after the show is over, if they like, they can Google Wandering Soul, S-O-U-L, on the internet, and they can find a copy of the tape that they can listen to. But psychological operations in Vietnam had and Laos and Cambodia, for that matter, had a multifaceted way of reaching people. It was through printed media, through face-to-face contacts, teams that would visit the outlying areas and tribes, and also, of course, loudspeakers and audio media and radio and television. So we developed this one broadcast tape called Wandering Soul, or since we were Beatles fanatics, we occasionally just called it Rubber Soul in those days, which was something that you would play from a helicopter at night in the middle of a sheet lightning storm when the helicopter was so high up that you couldn't hear the rotor blades. But there would be something right out of a Boris Karloff movie with all these screams and screeches of dead souls of soldiers who had been abandoned on the battlefield without proper burial ceremonies, and now they were and now it was their fate to sort of go wandering through oblivion because of the misfortunes of the war. And wouldn't it have been nicer if they had not died on the battlefield and instead had worked together to reconcile with South Vietnam, so to speak?
Yeah,
so that message got sort of snuck in there towards the end. And we would go up, as I said, at night with this thing, and it was pretty spooky, I have to say that. We worked it up in the laboratories of JustPow, the Joint U.S. Public Affairs Office in Saigon, which was sort of the joint State Department, CIA agency, and military super headquarters down there. And a lot of people didn't even know JustPow existed. But that was sort of the super brain headquarters down there, you might say. And we worked it up in the labs there, and people were saying, "What the hell are you doing making all this crazy noises and chains rattling and people screaming and moaning and stuff like this in Vietnamese?" And I said, "Just trust me, you know." So that was the result of Wandering Soul, and we would occasionally have people come away from their units or surrender on the battlefield, and when we were asking them later on, what made you decide to come over? Well, it wasn't any of that stupid Allied propaganda, certainly, but I heard some of my old friends up there, you know, in the night, and that was it, you know.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's very fast. That's so crazy. I mean, back in...
That's the short version of the great Rubber Soul tape, or Wandering Soul, if you look it up online.
I can't even imagine what would have ran through some some soldier just crossing about there, just hearing those recordings. That must have really tripped them out.
Yeah, well, most of the recordings that we played would be sort of straightforward messages from President Tu or Vice President Key or somebody like that, telling people to please put down your arms and come over and surrender and get a hot meal and R&R and all that. But we had a few of these bizarre things, and that was one of the bizarre ones. You get a good idea of how that sort of thing works in the movie Apocalypse Now,
yes.
when you notice that when Colonel Kilgore's helicopters are attacking that Vietnam village, he decides he's going to add a little scare flavor to it by playing the Ride of the Valkyries. And
Great
you
scene.
notice the impact that has when, in the movie, the helicopters are attacking, and this Wagnerian music is roaring in the background, and Birgit Nilsson, who has this unbelievable voice, is howling out the areas of Brunhilde, and it's just makes shivers go up and down your spine.
Yeah, even if I heard that today, if I was in a battlefield and I heard the adversary blaring some sort of wild music or wild sounds, it would be kind of intimidating.
Yeah, well, Francis Ford Coppola had heard, he was a sort of an aficionado of Wagner, and he had heard, of course, Birgit Nilsson do Brunhilde, and after that, he wouldn't have anything else. He was offered to use some other tracks, but I'm trying to remember, I think it was the Vienna Philharmonic or the Berlin Philharmonic that had the rights to the Birgit Nilsson version, and he hounded and hounded and hounded them until he got permission to use it. He simply wouldn't have anybody else than that woman, and she had one of these absolute killer voices. If you listen to Wagner's Ring and you hear the one with Birgit Nilsson, that's it. You'll never listen to anyone else.
Amazing. And one of my listeners wanted me to bring this up to you. He had asked me if you ever got a pair of Ho Chi Minh racing slicks when you were a nom.
Well, I'm not sure if he means sandals.
Yes, sandals. Correct.
Yes.
That's what he's referring to.
No, I never did.
Did you ever see anyone wearing those?
I never saw that. Well, Ho Chi Minh sandals were pieces of automobile tire.
Correct.
That were sort of cut into a sandal shape, and then you'd put some leather straps on them or whatever to hold them in place. So a lot of the peasants would wear these things, but they weren't what you'd call designer unless you went into Saigon and you looked for some designer ones that they were trying to sucker Americans into buying. But I never had any interest in them anyway.
Yes. I'm sure he was joking about it, but
Oh, sure.
I definitely had to get that in there for him.
If I may ask,
go ahead.
It really has nothing to do with the conversation we're having, but someone also has a question for Dr. Aquino, and it is they wanted to know. Of course, my page is now stopped from moving. They wanted to know if the doctor had ever. I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this right. Ask him if he about his trip to Wewelsburg, Wewelsburg.
Yes, they're inquiring about your trip to Germany.
Wewelsburg Castle in Germany. Yes.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. Someone asked you if you would elaborate on that trip.
Sure. And that took place in the early 1980s. I think 1982, I believe. And the Wewelsburg Castle in Westphalia has, of course, been around since the Middle Ages. It was originally, I believe, the residence of the bishops of Paderborn in that area. Paderborn, Westphalia, is sort of a German state in the north-central area of Germany. And when the Nazis took over control of Germany in 1933, Heinrich Himmler, the Reichsfuhrer of the SS, very much wanted to recreate the Teutonic Knights of medieval Germany with the SS, and also, of course, to bring it forward into modern culture as a sort of a linear descendant of this older German tradition. So he and several of his advisors, some people would call them occult advisors, I would tend to call them more antiquities advisors, like Willi Gut and so on, looked around Germany for, which is of course littered with old castles, and they were looking for one that was in the right position and sort of had the right atmosphere, locale to be a new sort of central point of the world, as they called it, Mittelpunkt der Welt. And they settled on the Wewelsburg Castle. And Heinrich Himmler purchased it for, I think, the price of 1 mark, which is what you can get away with when you're the head of the SS. And between 1933 and the start of the war, in particular, he did quite a lot of renovation on it, and built it up into the sort of the ceremonial ground zero or headquarters, sort of the Vatican, you might say, of the SS. The unpleasant side of that was, since he wanted a lot of free labor, he also started a medium-sized concentration camp next to it, Niederhagen, I think it was, and several of the inmates of that died during the construction of Wewelsburg. So it wasn't exactly a pleasant undertaking in the sense of Walt Disney, building Sleeping Beauty's castle in Disneyland. But the Wewelsburg did get mostly completed by the beginning of the war, at which point it's sort of got into the back seat because the war from 1939 on occupied Himmler's and the SS's time and thoughts at that point. But after the war, I'd kept hearing that this castle had existed. I'd hear in books such as Goodrich Clark's, or other little books on Nazi occultism or Nazi lore, that there was this castle called the Wewelsburg. And I got more and more interested in it. I decided I'd try and look it up. So finally, I was over there on an assignment at NATO headquarters and had some extra time on my hands. So I went to Westphalia and tracked it down in the town of Wewelsburg.
Killing 2 birds with 1 stone.
Well, I suppose.
Yes.
And I went there. It was pretty much deserted, except as an occasional youth hostel at that time. And the Nazi, the chambers that Hitler had renovated in the North Tower, the Valhalla below, and the Grail Hall up top were still in their original form. So I asked the caretaker if he would show them to me, which he did. One of the nice things about being a doctor and a professor is that when you call yourself a professor doctor in Germany, you get a lot of heel clicking, which you don't in the United States.
No.
That is so cool. I want to bring back heel clicking.
Yes.
And most people won't even know what that means.
Well, if you're a professor in the United States, it's AU, but they still hold you as a sort of an incarnated divine spirit in places like Germany.
Right.
So anyway,
amazing.
He gave me the guided tour, and then I said, "Would you mind if I spent some time by myself in the Valhalla, the underground room?" And he said, "Zu Befehl, Herr Professor Doctor, here are the keys. Whenever you're through, just bring them back."
Wow.
So I spent the afternoon and evening down there in the Valhalla and conducted the Wewelsburg working, which I've described in my Temple of Set book at some detail. In which you might say, reactivated the spirit of the castle, if you will, and in a very satisfactory way, which led to the reformation of the Order of the Trapezoid in the Temple of Set, and, of course, all the many spin-offs from it since then. So that's the sum of the Wewelsburg working. I became very good friends with the curators of the Wewelsburg Museum, and they would consult me occasionally thereafter when they were putting together books and things on the history of the Wewelsburg. And most recently, one of my own books, We Break the Sword, is a historical novel, you might say, about Germany during the period of the Third Reich, in which the Wewelsburg plays a very prominent role. So if your listeners would like to sort of get a historical fictionalized tour of the castle,
nice,
conducted by Adolf Hitler and Heinrich Himmler, that novel is a fun place to start. And they'll also learn about a few of the other interesting aspects that Himmler and the SS were involved with, such as their expeditions to Atlantis and work with the infamous Bell.
Oh, yes. The Germans have... go ahead,
I have to say, I'm amazed. Just hearing you talk about how you went into this castle, performed your ritual, and I have to ask, though, what do you... I mean, there's so much to talk about when it comes to the Second World War and the Nazi regime. But my question to you is, how have you... I mean, it's interesting by far, but do you ever get any flack where people say, well, there's a connection between black magic or Satanism and or Nazi, just the Nazis in itself? I've watched, I've never read about it, but I've watched a few documentaries about the history of the Nazis and their, I can't say large portion, but a small portion of black magic. I really don't know a lot about it, but do you ever get flack for that because of the association with the Nazis?
By the way, great question. And there is another caller here on the line. I just wanted to make sure that they could hear us really quickly before we take their question. Caller, are you able to hear us right now? Caller.
Hello.
Caller.
Okay. Can you hear?
Caller.
Okay. Can
you hear the alpha waves? I'm blanketing my call with alpha waves. Listen closely just for a moment, please. I need everyone. I need silence. I need silence even from Dr. Aquino. If Dr. Aquino could even stop talking for a second.
Oh my.
I'd like to blanket him with some alpha waves before I speak to him.
Good Lord. Well, I think you will get your wish here.
Okay. Yeah. Now
that felt good. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yes. Now I just need some vapor. Just let me get a bit of vapor here. Vapor and alpha. Hold on a second.
Yes, Mr. Aquino, I'm not quite sure what's happening here, but it seems that we are being overrun by positive energy here, which is always good.
Okay. Okay, so
alpha waves are always good, and they also bleed through to anybody else who's listening. So your whole audience should be wagging its tail by now.
Yes, that's very lovely.
Yes, I mean, full disclosure here, Dr. Aquino and I are running a psyop right now on the entire audience. You're just not aware of it yet, but you will soon become more and more aware of it.
I feel it.
And yes, and there's just one more thing I need.
Go ahead.
Here, I'm going to open this just quickly. I need a Mountain Dew.
Yes, Mountain Dew.
Okay, there we go.
There you go.
I've got a Mountain Dew. And, I called a couple reasons because I heard black magic and I heard castles, and so I decided to call in.
No problem.
But speaking of Mountain Dew, this is a question for Dr. Aquino. Just let me mention this quickly. Dr. Aquino, I love you with all of my consciousness forever and ever. But a question about dews. Dr. Aquino, have you ever been hit by directed energy weapons, while you were sleeping, in the middle of the night? Or have you ever hit anybody else in the middle of the night with directed energy weapons, commonly referred to as dews?
That's a great question. I've hit a few people at nighttime, but that's another story. Go ahead, Mr. Aquino.
The shorter answer is no. I would like to back up just a little bit and answer the question that was put a few moments ago, which was, is there a connection between Satanism and the Nazis?
Yes.
And I would really have to say a flat no, because Satanism... No, because Satanism is, particularly at that time, would have been a very direct inversion of Christianity or Judeo-Christianity.
Inversion.
And
Yes.
the Nazis went out of their way to not get in the way of Well, they got in the way of Judaism, but they didn't get in the way of Christianity. In fact, one of Adolf Hitler's very first actions upon becoming chancellor was to work out a treaty called the Reichskonkordat with the Vatican, in which they both agreed to stay out of each other's way. Signed, of course, by Ribbentrop on behalf of Germany and by Pope Pius XI on behalf of the Vatican. And so that's why the Vatican remained very silent and very helpful, really, to the Nazis throughout the entire World War II period. We're one of the things that Pius XII sort of got in trouble a little bit after the war for, but there it was. It was the result of the mutual hands-off treaty between them. So there was no involvement in Satanism per se. And Hitler himself was what you might call a symbolic materialist, in that he was very much moved by, say, what we were talking about in terms of Wagnerian visions and musical visionary sensations, but he was not a student of old Germanic occultisms in the pre-Christian era of runes and runic lore in the way that Heinrich Himmler was. So he would have considered Himmler a bit more of a fundamentalist in that regard, where Hitler would have considered himself more of a realist. Hitler didn't really have a collection of historic or occult books, but Heinrich Himmler certainly did.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Dr. Aquino, which card do you see Hitler? Is Hitler the magician? Is that his card?
You're talking about the tarot deck. Well, I don't know that I would align them. I don't know that I would assign a tarot deck card to any of them.
Well, what about this? Hitler would have been a practitioner of lesser black magic, certainly. Would you agree with that?
Yes, he wouldn't have called it that, but he was very definitely a practitioner of it, in the same sense that you might read those techniques that are discussed in Mind War, my book.
Great book.
He was very familiar with those and the state of those arts at that time, and he used them. And one of the most interesting sources you can read there is the second volume of Mein Kampf. The first volume is what most people are most familiar with, and that has to do with his historical experiences when he was growing up in the early years of struggle of the Nazi Party. But Volume 2 has more to do with his ideas about the control of people in a political sense. And he actually tells a couple of stories on himself, such as he said when he went out to try to get some people excited at 10 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday in a beer hall meeting, and everybody just stared at him in a stupor. And he realized that this meeting was going to be an abject failure. It was the wrong time of the day, the wrong audience in the wrong place, but he switched over to nighttime rallies with lots of torches and things, such as you see in Triumph of the Will and so on, and then everybody would get all fired up. So he became a great student of technique and style. There are films and photographs that are still extant that show the very great care that he put into all of his gestures during speeches. He choreographed himself in advance. At this point, I will clutch my fists and pound my chest. At this point in the speech, I'll have one hand up in the salute and the other one, grasping at air in a ferocious way. So he had all this planned. It looks so natural when you watch this guy giving a speech. It wasn't at all. It was theater. Very, very, very carefully crafted theater.
Yes, it's interesting you say that. Go ahead,
What did he call it? What did he call it if he did not call it lesser black magic?
I don't think that he gave it a nickname. It was just the way that he had learned to deliver speeches, and the person who he credited with having taught him this was Dietrich Eckart, who was, of course, one of the major theatrical forces in pre-Nazi Germany, and also the founder of the Thule Gesellschaft, the Thule Society, who was very much involved in the theater in pre-Nazi Germany and had given Hitler a good deal of personal instruction on how to present himself in speaking and personal appearance situations.
Ultra aware of his environment.
Oh, very much so. And the environments were all created. Yes. When you see when you see a movie like Triumph of the Will, I mean, it's a Cecil B. DeMille production from one end to the other. I think my favorite moment in Triumph of the Will is actually a sort of a joke that I think Leni Riefenstahl struck in there as a sort of a private bit of fun, because in a piece of the film where these masses of stormtroopers are parading through the streets of Nuremberg, and there are these wildly cheering crowds, and they're all leaning out of windows with swastika banners, and the music is blaring and everything, and then the camera cuts away to a cat that is sitting in a window, licking its paws, that couldn't care less about it. And it's just such a wonderful breakaway moment, that shows you the difference between people and cats,
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
You think you've been
absolute
a cat
ruckus going on everywhere else, and the cat's up there,
If I may, Doctor, the only reason I had brought up that question about the affiliation with the Nazis and black magic and or Satanism was simply because of, just the sheer controversial impact that the word Nazi or anything to do with the word Nazi has on people. I got to be honest, I've never read up on the history of the Nazis with black magic, but I do know that it did exist.
Yes.
They used to, from what I understand, they used to have certain. Well, you know what? I better not even try to explain what I remember, because I probably might.
Well, they had pagan Yuletide rituals that were brought forward from the Middle Ages, and of course a lot of torchlight ceremonies and oaths and things like this, particularly in the SS, which really got off on that kind of thing. But
you have to admit
this had nothing to do with the Judeo-Christian Satan. It had everything to do with Old Norse gods such as Odin and Thor and Freya and those characters, but not really anything to do with Satan or Satanism per se. If you accused a Nazi of being a Satanist, he would have looked at you and said, "Where the hell do you come from?"
Yes, very true.
They considered Christianity generally as a sort of a decadent modern-day variation on Judaism, so it was the last thing that they wanted to perpetuate more.
Yes, and hold on one second. Caller, did you have anything else to ask before we cut you loose here?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Let me get my pre-show notes here.
I got some notes.
They're in another room that I have blanketed with the different alpha waves.
You rehearsed for this?
Oh no, this is all improv.
Oh, okay, good.
But he's prepared.
I didn't blow my cover. I didn't just blow my cover, did I?
No, that's okay. Well, you're supposed to say no. I didn't rehearse. That's what you're supposed to say.
Oh no, I did. Yeah.
Okay, good. Even if you do rehearse.
Okay, so moving right along.
Go ahead.
Moving right along to my next question here, and guys, how can Dr. Aquino answer, my questions if I can't ask my questions? I got to ask my questions. Okay, so I'm gonna. And Dr. Aquino, you said you were talking about movies, Hollywood movies. And I thought of a question, Hollywood movies.
Okay.
Do you ever have slumber parties, where like friends come over and you watch movies and, order pizza, drink some Mountain Dew and, have a slumber party?
I don't think so.
It sounds like you're describing Neverland Ranch.
Okay, well, I thought I would ask because I
have a lot of friends that I've talked to over the years about Hollywood movies, of course, and I was very good friends with Forrest Ackerman, Mr. Science Fiction, and attended many a meeting, including the salons that he used to have at his place up there in Hollywood Hills. So sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, maybe consider this, Dr. Aquino. I was thinking about that. I would like to watch some classic episodes of The Twilight Zone with you.
Yes, The Twilight Zone.
I think that would be. I thought it would be I was like, that'd be really cool. I would actually pay for that.
It'd be great to have them there.
Then I thought, well, I'll pitch this to Michael tonight. You know, maybe we can make some quick cash. You know, hey, Twilight Zone with Dr. Michael Aquino. And so with that, Dr. Aquino, what's your favorite episode of the Twilight Zone? Or a couple, if you think of some Twilight Zone plots.
Well, I'm not really an aficionado of the Twilight Zone. You know, my old favorite at that time was actually the original Outer Limits, which was yeah, there you go. Yeah.
You were at least 40 to 50 years.
Yes. Love that.
I was more of an Outer Limits kind of kid because they tended to have scarier episodes. But
okay, what's your favorite episode of Outer Limits?
Of Outer Limits?
Yeah.
Oh. Gee, I mean, I like them all. I can't put my finger on a particular episode. I'd have to go back and review them.
No pressure. I don't mean to put you on the spot. You know, if it comes to you at any point during this phone call, you know, if you think of a storyline or an element from the Outer Limits, you know, just any idea. Like what how did you meet the Outer Limits, the show? Like what age were you? Did you have a television, you know, like those kinds of things?
Yeah, probably as a high school kid in the early 1960s in Santa Barbara, just watching it on black and white TV like everybody else. When I was a real little kid, here in San Francisco in grammar school, my parents would allow me to go upstairs to the room in the attic where we had our real old TV at that time that needed rabbit ears to catch anything.
Oh, old school.
And at 12:30 at night on Saturdays, there was a channel that would have old 1940s monster movies, the
nice.
Universal stuff.
Very cool.
So to make sure that the monsters wouldn't get me while I was watching the shows, I would take the pillows from the back of the couch and build a fort at the front of the couch, so that I could watch safely from within this fort film. And then I just had to make sure I could make it down the stairs before the monsters got me after the show was over.
Amazing. By the way, is this Dan?
That is amazing. That is amazing.
Dan, is that you, Dan?
This is a Vapor.
Oh,
Bat.
Vapor. Okay, wrong guy here.
Yeah, you know Lepo and Vapor Bat.
Wrong man. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, they're on Twitter.
You sounded just like my friend.
And Dr. Aquino, if I can, you know, I received an email, and so I thought maybe it was from you because that's why I was thinking of like the slumber party and that. And I had this email, and the title is "Might Be Fun to Meet Soon." Might be fun to meet soon. And it's from, you listen. I mean, it might be you. Maybe you just need a refresher here. I
wouldn't title anything like that in an email because you never know where it's going.
Amazing.
3:56 a.m. was when it was received. But, okay, Lord. So it's not you. Okay, so anyway.
Yes.
Thank you so much for your time.
By the way, caller, I do have a suggestion for you. By the way, for a good movie to watch.
What's that?
A bit of an old school 1971 classic, THX 1138.
George Lucas. Yeah.
George Lucas, correct. It's always a favorite of mine. It really sums up a lot of what we go through in a very strange way. For those that haven't watched it, yes, THX 1138. Definitely a classic to watch if you haven't seen it already. Go ahead, caller.
Yes. Dr. Aquino, can you help everyone that's listening to this broadcast emanate from the internet? Can you help them? Can you show them the keys to the first three dimensions, the key to the fourth dimension, and then finally the key to the fifth dimension?
Amazing. Thanks for the call.
Thank you.
Right, take care.
I think what he's referring to is that the three books in my Mind series,
yes,
the book Mind War, Mind Star, and Find Far.
Star, yeah.
Each of these actually addresses a different dimension of existence and perception. Mind War is a book about the control of the first three dimensions of the objective universe, which exists, of course, as objects and phenomena in objective space-time. And Mindstar, the second book, has to do with the human point of perspective, or the human soul, or the human consciousness, which is the fifth dimension. And interestingly enough, that's what your caller earlier described as the Twilight Zone, because Rod Serling called it that too, the dimension of imagination. And he was very accurate about that, because the fifth dimension, in terms of it being the human perspective on the first four dimensions, is what makes it the fifth dimension. It's sort of the point outside of things that allows you to see the things that are that are being looked at. The fourth dimension is that of time, and it's one of the most misunderstood. It's also the subject of Find Far, that book, because there's a lot of misunderstanding about the fourth dimension. No thanks to Albert Einstein, frankly. But the fourth dimension simply has to do with the change in location between any 2 points of reference in the objective universe. So if you have a tennis ball in front of you and you have one across the room, and then you move one of them towards the other, you're changing the fourth dimensional relationship between the two of them by that. Each tennis ball has existence in the first three dimensions in the objective universe, and it displaces a unique point or group of points in time space, and you create a fourth dimensional relationship when you change their relationship to one another, and you, as the outsider who can perceive this change, are the point of the fifth dimension. So I hope that hasn't made it too obscure. But it's actually, these five dimensions are a very simple sequence of things. And when you hear people running on about, higher dimensions and wormholes and warps and things like this, you can pretty well toss this out with the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus.
Amazing.
And even Einstein, if you Google Einstein's fudge factor, Einstein couldn't get his theories of relativity to work. So he introduced a fudge factor, which sort of jams them together to make them work. He doesn't publicize it, but it's there, and you'll find it if you look for Einstein fudge factor. And it pretty much puts the lie to what most people think of as Einsteinian relativity, because they've got it all wrong. The fourth dimension is nothing more complicated than the change of locations between any two objects. So if you're talking, for example, about the famous speed of light, of 186,000 miles per second, most people would say, that's a constant. It's the same everywhere, no matter whether you're on a spaceship traveling fast or you're standing still on the Earth or whatever. My answer to that is no. It's 186,000 miles per second measured against wherever you happen to be taking the measurement from. And to that, you have to add the velocity and change in location of where you're standing. So if you're on a spaceship that's traveling 1 mile an hour, and that's your only point of reference, then of course the speed of light will be a constant of 186,000 from it. But if you're standing on Earth behind the spaceship, and you're watching the spaceship proceed, and then it shines a light ahead of it, then you're looking at a higher velocity of light from Earth because of your point of perspective. And that's relativity. That's real relativity.
Yes, and
very complicated.
Yeah, very complicated. Are you still there?
Who, me?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we still have Mike here. I'm glad you're there, Mike. And we do have another caller here. Caller, go ahead.
Hello, yes.
What's up, my friend? Go ahead.
I have a question for Dr. Aquino.
Let it rip, my friend.
All right, yeah, I was just wondering about, because he wrote a book called The Morgendale, or The Morlindale, which is a take on Tolkien's Einlindale from the Silmarillion. I'm a big Tolkien fan, nerd, and I'm just wondering where he came up with the language for that, and also for the language that we find in I think it's, what is it, the Call to Cthulhu in the Satanic Bible. So anyway,
okay, the Tolkien themed book is the Morlandale, and that's Morlindale, and it's the Song of Darkness, or Song of Night, or Song of Illuminated Darkness, as its subtitle gives it. And it's currently in publication. You can find it on Amazon with the rest of my books. Because it needs to be a full color book, it's on the expensive side at about $35, I think, US dollars. But that's because the color printing forces it to be at that high.
Oh, yes.
Because the whole thing consists of reproductions of scrolls that are in English language, but are in a font that is very close to the Elvish Tengwar, so that it's almost like you're reading Elvish, although the book, of course, is in the English language. And indeed, when Tolkien used the Tengwar, his Elvish script, he would sometimes use it to construct English sentences, and sometimes he would construct a completely different Elvish language word or sentence, like Namarie, which means farewell in Elvish. Yes. And he also had this Cirth, which was a sort of a block printing text that looked kind of like the Old Norse runes. And you'll see both the Cirth and the Tengwar in various Tolkien publications. And you can look them up. You can also, for your interest, you can find these fonts on the internet, download them, and actually construct language yourself in them if you like to, by writing something in English and then changing the font over to the Tengwar, and then whoop, there it is. You'd have to do some refinements with all of the diacritical marks, but it is there. So I used very careful studies of both the Tengwar and the Cirth when I was researching the Morlandale, which is a retelling of the Silmarillion events and the Lord of the Rings events through Melkor and Sauron, with a couple of other bit players along the way, such as the Witch King and Palando the Blue Wizard. So that's the Morlandale. I thought it was kind of an interesting event also because it was written in one exercise that took me perhaps about 2 weeks of nonstop reading and research and writing at a time when I was wearing the One Ring. And the story behind that is that about the time that Peter Jackson had finished his second movie, I thought it would be kind of interesting to collect a One Ring. As you know, that at those times there were millions of different kinds of rings available through Noble and so on. So I looked around through the Tolkien licensed people in England, and their absolute top of the line 24 karat gold One Ring was made by a special Tolkien licensed jeweler and sold by an outfit called Tolkien Town. So I had one custom made and received it here in San Francisco. And as soon as I put it on, I started to write the Morlandale. I kept it on and I wrote the Morlandale for 2 weeks. I took that damn thing off. I haven't had it on since. And you can call me superstitious if you like, but that's the story of the Morlandale.
Amazing.
Brilliant.
Anything else, caller, before we cut you loose here?
Yeah, I could talk to Dr. Aquino all night, but
I agree.
I'll just.
He was asking. I think he was also asking about the language, the Lovecraftian language.
Oh yes, Call of Cthulhu.
Was used in the Satanic rituals. When Anton LaVey was working up the Satanic rituals in 1971. He said he wanted a Lovecraft section for it, and would I write him a Lovecraft essay and a Lovecraft ritual? So I said, sure. I was on the faculty of the U.S. Army Armor School at Fort Knox at that time. So in my time off, I, re-studied my Lovecraft a bit, and then I worked up a complete language, which I called Yagothic, which I became almost as fluent in using as I could English. And then I wrote the ceremony for the 9 angles in that. And Anton got it. He liked it, but he said, I was thinking of something a little more nautical, a little more aquatic, Cthulhu stuff. So I said, okay, no problem. Since I had the language down pat, I did the Call to Cthulhu kind of overnight and sent that to him too, and he put them both in the book. That terrified the Lovecraft community here in the United States because they'd heard about all these things being fictional, and suddenly here was all these rituals in this complete Yugothic language. And there was probably the principal magazine at that time was called Nyctalops. And the Nyctalops people were having hysterics about this, so I took pity on them and I sent them an article in which I broke down how I'd constructed the entire Yugothic language, which they published in their next issue with a great sigh of relief.
Amazing.
If I may interject for a moment, Doctor, one of the first, not that this is of any importance, but when I first got into magic, one of the first things I read through and through was the Necronomicon by Simon.
Oh, yes.
And I got a lot of flack for that because many people were like, they said, oh, well, that's fake. There's no proof that that's real, so on and so forth. And the interesting thing is that I had a friend, maybe you might even know what I'm about to tell you, but there used to be a bookstore in New York City called The Magical Child. Had you ever heard of it before?
Herman Slater's place out in Brooklyn, I think.
That's right. And from what I understood, I had a friend of mine who I haven't talked to in years, but he used to work there. And it was told to me through the grapevine that allegedly there was this whole thing was made up about the Necronomicon, and they put this book out just to sort of make money. And I can remember when I was a boy. I was 13 years old, and I used to get Omni magazine sent to my home. And in Omni magazine, they had an advertisement for the hardcover version of the Necronomicon. There were 666 copies printed. And I begged,
there were a lot of different.
Mother,
the Necronomicon, of course, was a Lovecraft invention.
I begged my mother. I said, "Please lend me $40. I got to buy this book." She said, "Get the hell out of here! This is you don't need this trash." Now, years go by. Oh my God, I was 13, so that was about almost 40 years ago, and I was on Amazon about 2010. And I looked up the very book, that hardcover book of the Necronomicon. $350 later,
wow.
I ended up buying that book.
Well, here's the thing. The Simon Necronomicon, I was told some years later who the person was who'd actually written it up for a fast buck. But since I'm not completely sure that I won't, give his name here, but it wasn't even what I would call a very good Necronomicon because it was all just this sort of pasted over stuff from things like Arthur Waite's Book of Black Magic and Pacts and a lot of Judeo-Christian stuff, from Eliphas Levi and this kind of thing.
Right.
And a Lovecraftian Necronomicon would have to be straight Cthulhu, Yog-Sothoth, Azathoth, Nyarlathotep, and that crowd.
Yes.
And the best, a lot of those pretend ones came out. In the Temple of Set reading list, I've cited a few of them. I think one of the cutest ideas was by a friend of mine, Sprague de Camp, who I met through Forrest Ackerman. Sprague de Camp was one of the Lovecraft circle, and he was sort of exasperated by all these fake Necronomicons, so he did one.
That's right.
He took a copy of, I think it was the Koran, and he assumed that most people can't read Arabic worth a damn, so he took about the first 15 pages of the Koran and then copied them over and over again into something book size, and he published it
Wait a minute. Is this the Smoke and Fire book?
When you see a hardcover book, it's all in Arabic, and it says it's the Necronomicon. That's Sprague de Camp's fake one, which has got it's basically copies of the Koran over and over again all through it for about the first 15 pages. You'll start seeing them repeat themselves after a while. And he did it just so people, he did it actually for fun, so his friends would be able to have it on the bookshelf, and when somebody says, oh, you know, the Necronomicon doesn't exist, he could always pull it off the shelf and say, here it is, you know. And
well, the whole thing with the story by Simon, he put a few books out about the history of that original book, but allegedly the story is that there were these two monks that had been stealing from churches, stealing manuscripts from churches, and they ended up bringing this particular, this unmarked manuscript that was allegedly 3,000 years old. They bring it to the Magical Child store, and then those two monks ended up getting arrested and charged with stealing all these manuscripts.
How far away from the Magical Child is the Brooklyn Bridge?
I'll give you $1.
There you go.
Well,
amazing.
Well, you know, again, the reason I bring this up is because as I have continued to study black magic, I have also found that there are people who utilize the spells and the incantations of the Necronomicon into real magic. They have their own class of magic for Necronomicon.
You can write this. You can write these things for yourself if you study in my current Satanic Bible, for which I tend to get either delightful 5-star reviews or 1-star hate reviews from from the other side of the fence.
Right.
I go into the whole subject and science of black magic and of course concerning rituals. And one of the points I make about rituals is the same thing that both Aleister Crowley and Anton LaVey emphasized, which is the use of barbarous names of evocation, which means if you've got some good gobbledygook and you use it in a ceremony to get some atmosphere out of it, you'll get that atmosphere. That's what he used the Enochian keys for in his Satanic Bible. He got them all wrong. I use them the correct way and explain them the correct way in this Satanic Bible, but Anton simply made up a whole lot of this information about them, but he didn't care because he said, look, the people who are reading this thing and using it, they don't know jack shit, about John Dee's Enochian system or keys.
Enochian magic,
but they want something spooky, to yell at this part of a ritual, and the Enochian keys, you can kind of leaf through them and pick one that you like and use that. The example that I give, which is kind of even more fun in a way in the Satanic Bible, is that there was a movie in 1931 called The Black Cat, starring Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi, in which Boris Karloff, among other things, portrays a satanic priest, and at the beginning of a black mass, he gets up in front of everybody and chants this really spooky Latin invocation. And it took me years to figure out what that was, because I was saying to myself, whoa, what did Boris find that was going to be such a terrific satanic invocation? Well, when you find the translation, which I also include in my Satanic Bible, it's a collection of tourist phrases about Germany, about Latin, like where's the nearest toilet, and how is the sun out today, and which way to the street, and things like this. And he just repeats these phrases in Latin one after another. But because of the way they're being used, it doesn't make any difference. See?
Well, this is
the whole point, why you can use these things as what Aleister Crowley called a barbarous words of evocation, and Anton LaVey, of course, said the same thing.
Well, if I may, that's the reason I brought this up, is because when I was studying the Satanic Bible, the Anton LaVey's Bible, the master who taught me, who helped me understand black magic, who is a very good friend of mine still, by the name of Seth, and he told me that, well, we talked about it, and I asked him, I said, well, why would the Enochian chants in the back be there? Well, I mean, that's angel magic. How is that associated with satanic magic? And he said to me, he said something which I always found very interesting, which is this. it all really comes down to what you believe and what you use from your mental powers and your abilities to create things to happen and change the future with your own magic. So it doesn't have to be the Satanic Bible. It doesn't have to be the Enochian books or anything like that. It could just be something that you create and you focus on in order to change.
And as long as you know what the important thing is that you know what you're doing and that you're not being led down the garden path and doing something silly for an unknown reason. And that's why whenever Anton got to the word for God, in the ones that he used, that he took from Crowley's Equinox, he just switched the word Satan in there in the translation. So, as I said, Anton wasn't worried about this. Once I asked him about it, and he said, I'm using it as barbarous words of evocation, and if anybody complains about it, he said, let me know. And nobody ever did,
Amazing.
He said, it's only some guy like you, Mike, who's smart enough to know this stuff, who's going to get pissy about it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'll tell you, I owe a lot of it to my teacher who really explained things. But
since I just written a whole bunch of barbarous words for him in my Yugothic rituals, I was not really in a position to talk here,
Hold on one second. Caller, thanks for the call, by the way. I'm sorry to leave you hanging there.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I appreciate just listening in. Just one more question.
Go ahead.
The appetite.
Go ahead.
Michael, I know you did a lot of work on the Ark of the Covenant. I read that book of the Ark of the Covenant in your search for it. Wondering if you could express where you think it is and if there is a historical King Arthur. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, buddy. Take care.
Thank you, caller.
Bye.
He's talking about, was it Ark of the Covenant or King Arthur? Or what?
I
missed that one.
Yes, Ark of the Covenant, he's asking.
Well, I wrote an Indiana Jones story called, I wrote two Indiana Jones stories. One was called Secret of the Lost Ark, which appears in my book, basically my Star Wars novel called Fire Force. It's in the back of that. And then I wrote another Indiana Jones story called Grail Mission, which is in the back of my book called Ghost Rides, which is sort of a semi-autobiography, you might say. But these two stories were inspired, of course, by my having seen, first of all, Raiders of the Lost Ark and wondering, well, how much of this is there truth and how much of it is fiction. And the second one, Grail Mission, was after seeing the third Indiana Jones movie, The Last Crusade, where I sort of began wondering about the Holy Grail in that same way. So I researched and wrote these stories, and I very unashamedly did most of the research for Secret of the Lost Ark in the archives of the Defense Intelligence Agency in Washington, D.C., and the State Department's library over at the Foreign Service Institute, where I was working at that time, shortly after seeing the movie in 1981. So all of the scenes and sets and events and places and people and things that are in that first story all came from sources in DIA, and are by all means, not made up that way, and they had to do with the use of Hitler's stash of certain events and curios, not so much in the Wewelsburg, which was Himmler's domain in the SS, but rather up at the Eagle's Nest in Berchtesgaden, which is Hitler's tea house retreat way up above the Berghof, which was his main home there. So what you learn, of course, is that the fireplace up in the tea house actually has a secret compartment and a swing-away door, and that the tablets were concealed behind that from the original Ark, but that the Ark itself, minus the tablets, had made it over to the United States at the end of the war, and were buried not too far from San Francisco in warehouse number 6 of the Oakland Army base, which was the only one of the major warehouses here at the Oakland Army base that was a classified warehouse and therefore impossible to get into. As later relayed to me by Lieutenant Colonel Dennis Mann, who was given the job of of supervising the place one summer. And that's what tale is then told in Secret of the Lost Ark concerning the finding of the Ark of the Covenant there in Warehouse 6, but minus the tablets inside, which is what leads the rest of the adventure in the story in place. You ultimately wind up in Egypt at inside the Great Pyramid, and including secret compartments and chambers that open up from the King's Chamber and go down to the subterranean lake and islands beneath the Giza Plateau there. And people who doubt the existence of these things, all I can say is, do some research and some looking around, particularly on the internet. You'll find plenty of videos and other sources that discuss the Giza Plateau and the huge warren of rivers and waterways that are underneath it, dating back from the time when that part of Egypt was much higher. And there are old water lines that used to go high up, about halfway up the side of the Great Pyramid, which gives you a rough idea of the difference of water levels in some of those earlier ages, as also testified to by the erosion marks on the Sphinx that can't be explained by anything else than water up to that level. So that was the storyline, very loosely, of the Secret of the Lost Ark, and the actual history, such as it is, of how a storyline like that might have come into existence in the first place. Grail Mission does much the same thing with regard to the Grail, which was reportedly brought to England by Joseph of Arimathea, and then wound up in the care of Sir Francis Drake, who brought it over to California on the Golden Hind and left mysterious keys concerning it in a brass plate that was discovered in on the shores in Marin County earlier this century. The brass plate subsequently taken to the Museum of the University of California, Berkeley, where it was deciphered, and later on also by photo X-ray to bring out parts of it that hadn't been visible before, thanks to Dr. Stephen Flowers, who suggested that. Then tracing this mysterious object down through the mission system in old California, and ultimately to the predecessor of the original mission that used to be next to the city of Lompoc, which was the one just above Santa Barbara. And that was the famous, or the infamous, Cursed Mission, which had a number of very mysterious accidents and mass deaths, to the point where the Franciscans finally abandoned it completely and built an entirely new one, which is what you would visit today if you went there to visit the mission in that part of the state. But the ruins and the relics of the original old cursed one are still there, and that's what the story focuses on. In addition to a couple of detours through Los Angeles to get involved in the Black Dahlia murder and hauntings and ghosts at the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel that later on became the model for the Tower of Terror in Disneyland and so on. So there's a lot of good scary stuff there to keep you up at night.
Amazing, Mike. Were you saying something?
I wanted to bring up years ago. I had seen a documentary on, I don't know if it was the History Channel or the Discovery Channel. I think it was History, but they had this thing where they made mention of the I guess the Ark of the Covenant being not being what everybody thinks it may be, this golden ark container, but actually I don't even know what you would call it, but a woven basket of some type of materials that ended up somewhere in Africa. I don't know how accurate that is, but there was something I had seen years ago, and I just thought I'd throw that in there.
There's a legend about the Ark being in one of these old churches that I believe is in the Sudan, south of Egypt, and is sort of kept under guard there. Nobody gets to see it, which is sort of convenient, but it's become a bit of a tourist mecca. And you can sort of take that or leave it if you like. I mean, you can go to the Sinai Peninsula and visit Mount Sinai, and you will be. There's a big tourist trap there where you can buy T-shirts and mugs and you can actually see the original burning bush if you want to believe that too.
Oh,
this is sort of the Mideast version of Area 51. You know, you can go and check this out and get the T-shirts and stuff. In any case, the Hebrews, of course, didn't build or the Egyptians. The whole idea of a traveling ark is an Egyptian artifact. You'll see them in the tomb of Tutankhamun, for example. And the original version of a Hebrew one to contain the Samtwai, or the two statues, which are what Dennis Mann noticed as being important on this. The ark itself would have been a very crude construction if it was, even if it had beaten gold panels on it for purposes of insulation or ritualism. It certainly wouldn't have had the kind of workmanship you would see from the Egyptians had they done it after the fact of the ones in Tutankhamun's tomb.
Right.
Amazing stuff. And of course, as we were talking earlier, before the phone calls and all of the things that just went down right now, we were talking about Vietnam. And just to wrap it up really quickly on the subject here, it's well known that you wrote the Diabolicon. And I was just curious, are the rumors true that part of it also saw combat?
Well, part of it was blown up in combat.
There we go.
I think it was. I'm off the top of my head. I have to look up whether it was the Book of Beelzebub or Belial. I think it was Beelzebub that was blown up in a hostile rocket attack that came in at when I was stationed with the 1st Infantry Division for a while up at Lai Kay and going out to the various fire support bases, and I had these manuscript pages along with me. And in one night we got rocketed, and like everybody else, you grab your weapon and your helmet and nothing else, and you just dive for the nearest sandbag hooch when that happens. So I left the Diabolicon manuscript that I had with me with my clothes. It was all blown to bits, by one of the North Vietnamese or VC rockets that hit shortly thereafter. So I had to reconstruct that whole statement from scratch.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's very interesting.
If I may ask a question too, concerning the new version of the Satanic Bible that you've published. I want to ask you a question. There's a couple of parts in the very beginning, and I can't remember which chapter it is, but you had written a few things in a separate type of font that allowed the reader to read these words, and it to me, the first thing that came to mind was an actual version of a Satanic Bible. Now let me explain what I'm saying. When you read the Holy Bible, when you read the Catholic Bible, the Christian Bible, King James, you read stories, and that's exactly what you had done on a couple of the pages in the early parts of your book. And I found that so intriguing. And I was wondering, have you ever thought of writing a book that it's sort of like the Bible, like the Christian Bible, where it has stories about Lucifer before he fell from heaven, and I mean, I found that
that's what the Diabolicon is or was. It originally appeared, of course, without any side commentary at all. And, of course, in this Satanic Bible, there's a chapter that precedes it that explains how it came into being and how it was received and interpreted by Anton when I first sent it to him. But it was a standalone document, and the typeface that you're referring to, I believe it's called Swordsman or something, but I deliberately put the Diabolicon in that type to differentiate
I remember we
it from
talked
just
about
the straightforward text that I wrote the rest of the Bible in, and I did it to emphasize that this was not a human being that you were supposed to see speaking. And I did the same thing with the Enochian keys in their Word of Set translation to emphasize that this is different. If you have if you had the color edition of this new Satanic Bible, you would also see several color keys like this throughout it, because the little dragons, that are at the beginning of each chapter, up at the top there, if it's a chapter that is by Satan or one of the demonic personages, such as Satan's forward, the dragon is all red. And if it's by a human being, such as myself, it's a green dragon. You won't see this in the black and white edition, unfortunately. There's no way to do it. But that was just one of the little keys, that I put in there.
Well, again, I understand what you're saying about how the Diabolicon was blown up when you were in combat. My question is, would you ever consider writing like a more like a full book on just the story of Satan and his his time before when he was with God and all that? I just found that so fascinating, and it was very fun because it almost gave me like a sense, like being a Satanist myself. I read that and I was like, oh boy, finally, like a real satanic Bible. I really got a kick out of that.
That's what the Diabolicon was and was intended to be at the time, was a standalone document that was completely by these demonic authors. And it was used that way during the entire time of the Church of Satan. For example, when you go to the back of the book, as one of the appendices, I've copied in there the complete ceremony by which we would ordain satanic priests. And you'll see in there that there are several quotations from the Diabolicon in that ceremony, which was I would say, the most solemn ceremony that we had in the church at that time.
Yes, the writing is actually quite...
so that's
quite interesting.
That's all there, and I didn't write the Diabolicon because I was trying to tell a story, like I did, say, my Star Wars story. I wrote it because it was an inspired thing, and it sort of told me itself where it wanted to start and stop.
Yes,
it was a little bit like what I mentioned before when we were talking about the Morlandale, when I put the One Ring on, and suddenly I spent 2 weeks in a kind of a state of semi-hysteria writing the Morlandale, and then after that I took the damn ring off, and I haven't been able to write anything like that since then.
Yes,
about any Tolkien subject. That's those peculiar, works like that. That's all I can say, and I don't try to hokey this up.
Yeah, sometimes
to share you my state of mind when I put them together, that they wrote themselves.
Absolutely.
With me kind of watching them write themselves rather than me sitting out and saying, I bet I can spin a good story here.
Yes, it's like you're outside of yourself writing these things. Man is such
I become more of a spectator.
Exactly.
An admirer of them.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Man is such a complex yet simple creature in the cosmos. And by the way, we are joined by another caller here. Caller, you are live and well, correct?
Yes. Good evening, gentlemen.
Go ahead.
Evening.
I have a question for Lieutenant.
Yes,
Colonel,
ask away.
Dr.
Ask away.
Aquino.
Go ahead.
Dr. Aquino, are you aware of this this thing called QAnon, the letter QAnon?
No, I don't think so.
Have you heard of this? It's this letter Q, and it predicts what the Trump folks are going to do. Q presents himself as a Trump insider, and he drops.
I'm not aware of that at all. I know there was the only Q that comes to mind is that way back in my active duty days, the Q compartment was a top secret compartment for information that had to do with nuclear stuff. That's all. If you had a Q clearance, it meant you were working on H-bombs.
Okay.
And it was the name of
and of course, he was a character on a Star Trek show, too, I think.
Yeah. Well, let me ask it this way, Dr. Aquino. Let's suppose for a moment you were Q. Let's say you are Q, and I asked you, would you tell me if you were?
Unless I had some reason not to, but if you're asking me if I have some kind of a inside connection to the Trump administration, no, I don't. Sometimes I wish I did, because I've got a lot of opinions.
Yes.
But I'm not. No.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not accusing you of being Q, and I'm not, trying to make you feel uncomfortable. I just wanted to,
but I'm not. As I said, I don't have any inside tracks of any sort to the Trump administration or his group. Actually, a lot of the stuff that he does kind of pisses me off. I'm not one of these sort of knee-jerk either right-wingers or left-wingers either way. I evaluate everything on its own merits. But I'll give you a case in point. A few days ago, Trump said, "Okay, we're going to designate the Revolutionary Guard of Iran as a terrorist organization." And the Iranians got pissed off, and they said, "Well, okay, if you're going to do that, we're going to designate the U.S. Army and military in the Mideast as a terrorist organization." And I was thinking to myself, both you guys have your heads up your ass, because what you've just done is to officially remove Geneva Convention protections and prisoner of war protections from both sides if they get captured by the other. That's fucking stupid, all right? Things are bad enough over there already. You don't need to put this kind of a tripwire for misbehavior on both sides in place on both sides. So I would have spanked both the Iranians and Donald Trump or Pompeo or whoever else had that idiotic idea for removing Geneva protections from both our troops and the other guys.
Amazing.
That's just an example of how my assessment and advice, would go.
Yes. Well, thank you for the call and question. And by the way, earlier at the beginning of the program, I made an awful joke about the church burning, and I was curious to get both of your opinions on the latest burning of that Catholic church out there. It reminded me of the band, the black metal band. Well, no, it reminded me of the black metal band called Mayhem. Back in the early years, they were setting churches on fire, but this time, I don't think a Satanist or a black metal band had anything to do with it. Everyone is pointing fingers, trying to figure out who to blame. Some circles out there are.
I think they said, Michael. I think they said that it was electrical.
Yeah,
they haven't been able to investigate yet, only because the fire department hasn't deemed it safe to go into yet. So once they can, they're going to do an investigation. But they, as of right now, they currently believe it was an electrical issue.
Yeah, some saying it was arson, some saying it was an accident. Some people are saying that this was for insurance purposes, and of course, some are blaming Islamic terrorists. And wouldn't it be funny?
There's no proof on any of that.
Well, of course not.
They haven't done any investigating yet.
Wouldn't it be funny if it turned out to be a couple of Kiss fans?
Well, I mean, in all seriousness,
yes.
Kiss wouldn't do that either.
Yes, of course not.
Of course not. No, they wouldn't.
Yes, and by the way, I'm just also very curious what both of you think, and I'm not sure if any of you out there, and Mike and Dr. Aquino here, I'm not sure if any of you guys had seen photographs of the church on fire, in terms of this lady who snapped a photograph and she claimed she sees the image of Christ.
Oh, come on.
Yes,
there
it's
are
one of
people
those.
who see the Virgin Mary in their
cereal
refrigerator icebox too. So
Yeah.
Hey,
whatever floats your boat, I guess.
Something about 2 years ago. About 2 years ago, I cut open a potato that I was going to cook, and I actually found a cross in the middle of the potato. So maybe I'm blessed. Maybe I'm going straight to hell. Probably the latter.
Amazing. You know, the mind sees what it wants to see. Many people believe they see things in clouds and rocks on the side of a house. The mind automatically anthropomorphizes these things. That's how humans are hardwired. I don't know how many times throughout history we've seen the image of Christ that miraculously appeared for X, Y, and Z. We get these sort of, we get these sort of assumptions all the time, but really it's just your mind playing tricks on you.
Well, let me tell you this too, that it's an old principle in PSYOP, bringing back my old profession here.
Yes, sir.
That you can tell people, and it even goes beyond PSYOP, it goes right back to stage magic. People will see what they expect to see, and if you're a skilled stage magician, you will tell them and convince them what they expect to see. And that's what they will see. Watch my right hand here, basically, and, don't pay attention to what the left hand is doing, because the interesting stuff is with my right hand. Meanwhile, the trick is being operated by your left hand. And I go through this in some detail in both the Satanic Bible, where I'm talking about lesser black magic, and also in Mind War, where I'm talking about magic as a component of manipulation. And I'm talking very specifically about all these principles that are very, very familiar to stage magicians. I'm a life magician member of the Magic Castle in Hollywood. So I've spent a lot of time with stage magicians and stage magic as much as I have with the ceremonial kind. And believe me, this stuff is absolutely breathtaking when it's done right, and you never notice that it's happening. I mean, when I first visited the Magic Castle before I joined it and became first a student and then a magician member. I went there one evening and I was talking to a magician in the lobby there, and at that time Uri Geller and his spoon bending was a big deal, and he said, there's nothing big deal about bending spoons. He says, have you got a quarter on you? So I reach in my pocket and I pull out a quarter, and he says, give it to me. And he takes this quarter and he massages it in his hand out in front of me, and then he drops it back in my hand, and it's bent 90 degrees. Son of a bitch. And then I said, you switched it on me. He said, I did not. I'll prove it to you. Give me your car keys. I said, I believe you. I believe you.
Amazing.
What do you think about magic and its association with very early day, shall I say, black and or white magic? Do you think that the magicians utilized stage magic
of course
to convince those?
Of course. They wouldn't call it that. I mean, a good stage magician isn't going to tell you that he's going to flummox you.
Of course.
He's going to say, boy, am I going to get the spirits here right now? And back in the old, of course, today, if you go to a place like the Magic Castle with professional magicians, then you know that you're being pranked, But back then, if the good court magician is pulling this stuff on you, it's going to be completely believable.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I agree.
And by the way, since we are talking about this again here, I did want to bring up Anton and how you basically departed from that sort of philosophy to start your own thing because of how you saw the way things were being handled within the Church of Satan. And right now I actually have a photograph of you and Anton and Sammy Davis there. Sammy Davis Jr. there.
Sammy Davis.
Yeah, you guys are looking very happy, and there's a young Michael Aquino. Sharp as a tack right there with his hair slicked back. Amazing stuff. And by the way, we are joined by another caller before we wind down here slowly. Caller, go ahead.
Hey, it's a great honor to call in and talk to you, Dr. Aquino. I just wanted to, I've actually emailed before, but I've never actually been able to talk to you one-on-one. Here's my question. What is your opinion on the Satanic Temple and that crew of people? A documentary came out on them, and it was very, very hot, quote unquote, at Sundance and making the rounds. And who is, like, I think the public is I think they're sort of defining for the general public. They're redefining what a Satanist is. I was wondering if you just had any comment on that and how they're sort of.
I'm not familiar with the group or the individual that used. I've vaguely heard the name Satanic Temple, but I haven't really tried to look into it at all. My feeling is that I have explained the philosophy and the metaphysical concepts of this in the Satanic Bible and also in my Church of Satan books, the large 2-volume set. So I have tried to present the idea of the philosophy and the metaphysics in there for anybody who wishes to pursue it and practice it to use as a point of reference. I don't endorse any Satanist church of any sort right now. Certainly the one that uses the Church of Satan's name is just a bunch of dress-up atheists. And, if that's their thing, that's okay. That's their business, but I certainly don't have any interest in that kind of thing. My feeling is if you're going to be an atheist, then you be an atheist. If you're going to be a Satanist, you be a Satanist, and don't try to play games with the word just to get a little, dress-up notoriety for cocktail parties.
Yeah, great point.
But otherwise, I don't know about the Satanic Temple. I would have to say that when I approached the Church of Satan originally in San Francisco in 1969 and 68, I was very careful because I didn't know whether this was a bunch of kooks or reputable people or what. And I simply went to one of Anton's lectures, and I pretty much made my judgment on my impression of him at the time, which was that he was an impressive, ethical person who I wanted to get to know better and ultimately decided to trust completely. And that sort of plays into your earlier question here because I cannot tell you how much we trusted this man throughout the 10 years of the church as being a person of absolute, unshakable moral and ethical integrity. And the priesthood of Satan, he even used to rave about this himself. He said the priesthood of Satan cannot be anything but the paragon of ethical and moral perfectitude. Much other churches can have bums and con artists and stuff, but we can't. We've got to set the standard here. And that's the way we all felt about it, that this Church of Satan was one step above being an Eagle Scout in terms of its commitment to, morality and honesty and integrity, and you did not get to be a satanic priest, for example, unless you had gone through that individual working and ritual that's at the back of this Satanic Bible that I just published here, and you meant every single word of it, and the church meant every single word of it when it gave you that license. So in 1975, when Anton suddenly turned around and said, I'm going to make all the titles of the Church of Satan available for purchase, I cannot tell you the shockwaves that sent throughout the whole organization, including me. And that's why we left. We were horrified and, still are. I document all this in my Church of Satan history books. And I think it was a combination of stress factors on Anton and Diane LaVey that made him take that step. None of us were at all happy of it. We were just traumatized by the whole thing. So it was, and that's most especially myself. I considered the man like another father. I still do today. When I dedicated this Satanic Bible, it's dedicated to Anton as my devil father because he called himself my devil father, and I called myself his devil son.
Yes, you had a very great respect.
A godfather son, and that's how we felt about each other.
Yes.
So it was a horrible, horrible state of affairs.
Yeah, and, you had a very great respect for Anton.
Yes, and nobody could ever say a bad word about that man in my presence, and still can't. When people in latter days try to accuse me of attacking him in some way, I said, you find me one place in which I've ever said a bad word about him, and nobody ever has.
Amazing. Right. Thank you for the call, caller, by the way.
Hold on.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it, Doctor.
Is he still there?
Yeah, he's still
here.
Everyone's here.
I just wanted to let you know, caller, I know who you're talking about. I used to get email newsletters from them, and I believe the organization that we're talking about here, they're
atheists.
Beg your pardon?
Oh, they're atheists for sure.
Without a doubt. But what I'm trying to say is they've taken Satanism to a level where they want it to be more acceptable. I've seen images of them conducting presentations on I think it was the steps of like City Hall out in Detroit.
Right. Right.
And they talk about how they want to make it just more precedent in the public's eye. But I don't know. It's something like even me. Like I'm a Satanist. I'm a modern Satanist. I believe in the religion. To me is taking full responsibility for yourself. I learned a lot from Dr. Aquino. I learned a lot from Anton LaVey. And I took both of the characters that I just mentioned, and I interpreted what they were saying and tried to understand what it was all about. And basically it just comes down to being a good person and taking responsibility. However, I still don't tell my family about being a Satanist. My family's like, old school Italian, and it's just, they wouldn't accept it.
Well, that's how for a lot of people out there are when they are homosexuals and they have a religious upbringing. They're afraid to tell their parents because sometimes the parents don't even know because they don't want to get exiled from the family.
Let me tell you something here. The word, when you talk about the satanic religion or the satanic initiatory path, the word Satan, of course, has a Judeo-Christian history to it, and when we use it in a context with that myth cycle, just as when we're talking about the Egyptian myth cycle, we will refer to Set. But what we're really talking about in terms of an individual, not just you being an ordinary human being who's taking responsibility for himself, but a person who is asserting a divine prerogative to seek out and define good and evil based upon your perceptions of these things and your assignment of these values. As soon as you begin to assert yourself the ability to make judgments about what is good and evil, what is moral and amoral, you are becoming a god. This is the sin, if you call it that, of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, that they asserted the right to make these kinds of value judgments about good and evil. And that is the great sin, that instead of obeying somebody else's definitions of good and evil, that you take to yourself the responsibility to assign meaning. Just think of that phrase, assign meaning and assign value. When you do that, you are going beyond being a beast. You are going beyond being an animal, the dysfunctions by stimulus response. You are becoming a god or a goddess, and that is what a satanic initiate or a magician is all about. So it's this aspect of becoming more than a human being to become a divine consciousness with that assignment of meaning prerogative. That's what this is ultimately all about. And the book that I wrote called Mind Star goes into this in a really intense way concerning its discussion of the soul.
Yes, the soul. And by the way,
I would point you in that direction and say, this is where we're going with this, ultimately.
Right.
When we talk about Satanism, we're talking about a catchphrase, but the real thing here goes much deeper than that and has to do with your transformation from a beast into a god. And that's what we're all getting at here.
Right. You're talking about an evolution here, thinking on your own 2 feet, reaching your own conclusions on your own.
Bet your ass.
Through your own.
That's what got me interested in Anton LaVey, not that he was a smarter con guy than some other guy, but he had managed to hook his brain into something that was beyond ordinary humanity. And this was exciting as hell. And I said, I've got to learn more about this. I've got to study more about it. This guy may be a high school dropout, but he's got his teeth into something here, and I'm going to fucking find out about it.
Yes.
And that's where it got started. And I never looked back, and I never begrudged one iota of the time that I spent drinking at the fountain that he provided that way.
Yes. And caller, is that it? You good?
Yeah, that was great. And if you guys want to look that film up, it's called HailSatanFilm.com, and I think you're going to hear about it a lot this year. Again, I just worry that it ends up defining what Satanism is, and it's really a small group of people, So I'm glad we were able to talk about that.
Amazing. Thanks for the call, my friend.
Okay, take care, Dr. Aquino.
Thank you.
And there he goes. Yes, you could take a lot of vital information from a lot of your work and this sort of ideology in terms of taking responsibility for one's action, which is something we see that's completely void in today's society. An individual actually taking responsibility for what he did wrong and having a conscience and the self-awareness to know that he did wrong.
I spent a lot of time in the Mind Star book in particular, but on the others also, and in the Satanic Bible, on the ancient Greek concept of telos, T-E-L-O-S, and also in the Egyptian, that's the root for the concept of Kepher, and that has for its what you're getting at here is a vision of your ultimate self, which is what you strive to actualize. That doesn't mean that you convince yourself that you're there altogether. It's what Nietzsche referred to as horizon building. It's when you reach the limits of what you know and you are stretching out beyond it and you're saying there is a perfection of me that I can see, that I can sense, and I'm out for it and I'm going to, chase after it until I find it. That's the real holy grail, when we're talking about grails. It's the grail quest, as we mention it in the Temple of Set that way. And that's, that's this whole concept in Greek philosophy of the telos, the reason for being, the raison d'etre, the cause that you're here for, that is beyond just simply being a processing machine for sex and biology and all that kind of thing. There's a purpose to you that's beyond being a piece of meat.
Oh, yes.
That purpose is the telos, and that's what we're after here.
By the way, I still need to send you my copy of Mind Star, Doctor.
Sure.
Need to get you to sign that for me.
I'd be happy to.
Yes, no problem. And of course, as we wind down here, gentlemen, I did want to ask you, Doctor, about the upcoming 2020 elections. We aren't exactly that far away. It'll be here before we know it, but certainly it is early in the game. There are a few names here, and Mike, I did ask you about your personal opinions about this, but we haven't really talked to the doctor here about that. And I wanted to begin with one name here, Joe Biden. He's still pulling ahead. I'm not sure if he's going to run exactly, but it seems all indications seem to be positive that he just might in fact do that. And of course, all polls seem to be positive that he seems to be ahead of everyone, and following closely behind him is Bernie Sanders.
No, actually, you're wrong.
I'm wrong. What happened?
I think Biden is falling behind.
He's falling behind now.
Yeah, in fact, the only one who's ahead right now in the Democratic Party is Bernie Sanders, which is quite frightening. In my personal opinion, I don't see how this idealistic new socialist idea could, possibly work. I think we've been very good with capitalism for the existence of this country, and I don't see how. I don't even see how he can even be involved in politics, being a socialist, in my personal opinion.
Well, my father used to tell me, kid, there's only two ways you can get something for nothing. The first is you bolt a supercharger on your car engine. And the second is you jerk off.
Amazing.
Oh, wow, that is quite fascinating.
So when Bernie Sanders gets up there and says we're all going to have free medical care and it isn't going to cost anybody nothing that you can't afford, I say, okay, I don't think so. These people, I don't know what they, there must be something in the water in Washington D.C. and I'm not drinking it. All right, because these guys are whacks.
Yeah, a little crazy.
And Joe Biden is just dull. The best they can come up with. When I was a kid, we had some really interesting people like John Kennedy. He's exciting. The women all liked him because he had this great haircut, and the men all liked him because he'd gotten into bed with Marilyn Monroe.
Right.
So what the hell else do you want in a president? Hey,
that's true.
But John Kennedy had a heroic thing about him, and you could really get going, with somebody like that. And none of these people do. All these Democratic people are whack jobs so far. I keep waiting for them to come up with another John Kennedy or something, and nobody does. They're either these two old, half-demented men, Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden, who are old white men of all things, and then these younger kooks who seem completely divorced from reality. And Donald Trump, if you had a John Kennedy up against him, you could beat him. If you have these whack jobs, none of them will beat him.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure if anyone will be able to rival Trump. And of course, we already mentioned.
Right now, sure as that.
We mentioned
and he shouldn't be a hard person to beat. He got beat in 2016 because everybody thought that Hillary Clinton stank.
That's true.
It was an election of who hates the other candidate more and got out the vote.
I'm not going to argue with that. And of course, Bernie Sanders, he's still trucking along. And, he lost me a long time ago. But another issue that he made, or said rather, was that he would want to give felons the right to vote. I think that's kind of absurd. So I think he sort of
that's ridiculous.
Shot himself in the foot by saying that.
Well, that's, again, it's one of these broad brush things that you've got all kinds of people behind bars, and a lot of them you wouldn't want to trust them to date your daughter, much less vote. And there are others who may be perfectly lucid people, but you can't just paint the whole thing with a broad brush. And that's a bad brush to try and paint with. I don't know where he comes up with a crack idea like that. The same thing like, when you say free medical care, we don't have the infrastructure. We don't have the teaching programs to create those kinds of doctors. We don't have the hospital networks to support that kind of thing. I mean, the logistics of it, if you're in the Army like I am, the first thing you think about is all the logistics of a situation. That's what we call the S4 problems. That's the porta potties and the food and the vaccinations and all that you need, and the transportation systems. By the time you get around to worrying about the guy with a rifle, there's about 10 times as many people behind him who all have to have their shit together. And these presidential people are talking like they're from Mars.
Yeah, you're right about that. I'm not going to disagree. Crazy. It's very weird to see some of these candidates and what they stand for. We also have Pete Buttigieg out there. Also, he seems to be the new breakout media darling for the Democrats. He is an open homosexual, and many Christians out there have already taken issue with him. They say he should be ashamed since he knows it's a sin to be an open homosexual, and he's not doing anything to try to overcome his homosexuality.
My attitude towards homosexuality is summed up in a phrase that my wife and I came up with, and it is, just don't scare the cats.
That's a good one, yeah. Don't scare the cats.
You know what? It just comes down to if your politics are good, if your ideas are good, who cares what color you are, what nationality you are, what race or gender. That's the problem with a lot of these people, is they're so concerned about being so goddamn politically correct that they want to shove somebody that's different into the seat just because they're different. For example, when I forget who we were talking to, Michael, but we were talking to somebody who said they wanted to vote for, what's her name, Warren? Is that her name?
Elizabeth Warren.
Elizabeth Warren. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, well, why would we vote for her? Her ideas are terrible. And on top of that, she made it sound as, we need a woman in office. Okay, show me a woman who's got the good ideas, and I'll vote for her. But don't tell me I've got to vote for a woman just because it's time that we put a woman in office.
Yes.
That makes no sense.
Well, we went through that drill with Hillary,
Right. And nobody wanted her.
And the thing with Hillary, where is the investigation on Hillary? Talk about Russian collusion? That's where Russian collusion took place, and nobody gives a damn about doing any inspection on her.
Yeah, it's true.
I know it's a head shaker right now. I think, as I see it right now, unless the Democrats were to come up with somebody with some brains and dignity, which I don't see anywhere because they're just completely crazy right now. Trump is just going to get in on a default basis. We know what this guy's like. He may have orange hair and he's a little strange, but at least we know, what he's going to do and what he's not going to do, and he seems to be making more correct decisions than incorrect ones, which is more than we can say for any of the Democrats at this point.
Very true.
So I think it boils down to that kind of a thing. I think that a lot of people mourn for days when we had some pretty distinguished people running for president of the United States, and you would say, in a country this big, you should be able to find some really bright people to do it.
Yeah,
right.
That was the whole argument.
Not ding dongs,
Yeah, very true. And by the way, what you just said earlier in regards to JFK, some people actually believe that was one of the last presidents we had. That's real.
Oh, well, he was good.
Might be the case.
I may get in a lot of trouble for it, but Richard Nixon was good. He knew what he was doing. Lyndon Johnson is kind of like having Al Capone for president. He was sort of a more Washington D.C. savvy than Donald Trump, but somewhat the same kind of a person. He was a crook, but you sort of didn't mind him being a crook because he kind of got things done.
Yeah.
Jimmy Carter was a Boy Scout. I like Jimmy Carter.
Oh my God.
I never heard a person who didn't like Jimmy Carter, except that Jimmy Carter was too much of a Boy Scout for Washington, D.C., so everybody took advantage of it.
Terrible.
And pantsed him, basically.
Mike, you think he's terrible?
Personally, I think Jimmy Carter was terrible. I mean, I think the proof in that statement is when we had the Iran crisis and the American hostages were taken by the Iranians. They held on to the Americans for, I believe it was a year, and then all of a sudden Ronald Reagan steps into the boots, and they immediately let them go because they were scared shit of Ronald Reagan. Here's my point.
Don't you know? Aren't you aware that Ronald Reagan's camp talk about collusion? Ronald Reagan had a deal going with the Iranians not to let them go until he took over. That was one of the that was one of the big scandals of the time. So they sat on those guys until Reagan was in the White House, and then he says, "Okay, you can let them go now," and they did. I mean, that was.
And may I?
That was taken for granted.
Where does this come from, Doctor? Where does this come from?
Oh, it was all over the intelligence community. I mean, it was a standing joke, that this was going on. Carter was out of his damn depth in the White House, and he was too nice a guy, and he really didn't play nasty politics. And the people who were around Reagan, particularly Cheney and Casey, they were. These guys were just evil incarnate. I mean, I knew them and met them and stuff, and you wouldn't turn your damn back on them. Ronald Reagan was a nice guy. You never heard him give a speech that didn't make you want to have him put his arm around your shoulder. But he was also a movie actor. I mean, that was his job,
right.
Projecting himself like that. He wasn't dumb. He wasn't stupid. I won't say that. He was pretty smart, and he didn't allow himself to be jerked around. But he wasn't really calling the nasty shots behind the scenes. That was Casey and Cheney. And, of course, we saw Cheney all over again, when it came time for this doofus Bush, too.
Yeah, we did. And switching gears slightly here, I had asked you about this in the past, Michael. But with more recent discoveries of new Earth-like planets being detected by powerful telescopes as time goes on, some habitual, some not. Michael, do you think man eventually will leave Earth to colonize another planet? Well,
if he does, looking at these things within the limitations of foresight, which can't go that far out because things can get beyond us very fast in the future.
Yes.
But we could reach and colonize a planet like Mars if we wanted to. It's semi-habitable, but it would need a lot of Earth support and things. But you have to realize that as a biosystem, we are acculturated and acclimatized, to Earth. And the minute that you get away from it, even to something like the moon or Mars or stuff, you're in a very, very artificial environment. We need an enormous amount of Earth support so that you couldn't just go up there like you're in a Ray Bradbury novel and kind of cut yourself loose from Earth
yes.
and pull it off. All right. we are Earth creatures. We've built ourselves up, over the millennia as Earth creatures. Our entire DNA systems and biology and the whole business has grown up on this planet, and we're pretty much locked to it within the foreseeable future. I mean, if we blow this and we blow up the planet or burn it up or whatever because of a supernuclear war or something, escape to the stars ain't going to do it, guys. I went all through this in the 1970s when I was a charter member of what was then called the L5 Society. This began with Gerard K. O'Neill, and his space colony idea, and he was going to develop some orbital space colonies. He got people like Timothy Leary, all excited about this, and they were going to have space colonies that were in orbit at the fifth Lagrange point, which is sort of the balancing point between Earth and the Moon, and therefore the L5 Society got its name. And they were going to use the space shuttle systems and stuff to start building these colonies, and then it all got priced out of existence, and the Pentagon moved in and pretty well took over access to the shuttle programs and so on, and that kind of fizzled. And the L5 Society died out and became the NASA, sort of a NASA rooting section, as the U.S. Space Society or something, when at point I lost interest.
Understood. And in your bio, you are listed as having credentials in strategic and space intelligence.
I'm one of the Army's very first space intelligence officers. I went through the Joint and Space Intelligence course. At that time, it was conducted by the U.S. Air Force because the Army didn't have those facilities yet. I spent the next 4 or 5 years at headquarters U.S. Space Command in Colorado Springs and Cheyenne Mountain, where I was the J2X officer at J2, which is the Joint Intelligence Office there. The X stands for the unexplained phenomenon aspect of it, which is the basis for the old famous X-Files, because all the stuff that Cheyenne Mountain used to get on its readouts and printouts that it couldn't make sense of, but it didn't want to just throw in the trash can. It would send them across my desk for me to look at.
Amazing. And are you open to the existence of extraterrestrials, Michael?
Well, yes, I am. I'll also say it this way. Okay, I had my security clearance as a space intel officer was above top secret at the top secret special intelligence level, and I had 2 compartments. Compartment 1 was TK, which is Talent Keyhole, which is basically the satellite intelligence network up there that NORAD used to monitor from. And the other was MJ, which is sort of a different compartment from the MK series, which you're familiar with from MK Ultra and MK Naomi and stuff,
right?
More sinister. Well, the MJ had to do with contingency aspects of anything that might be extraterrestrial. So the whole notion of contingency planning that might have to do if we bumped into something that came down and didn't seem to be from this planet was, again, stuff that I had to pay attention to because it had the MJ compartment, suffix on it. So TK and MJ things were, I spent my time there at Space Command working on for those years from 1990 to 1994. Our office was at the headquarters U.S. Space Command, Colorado Springs at Peterson Air Force Base, and we also owned Cheyenne Mountain right down the road from us, which of course was where NORAD hang out and is sort of famous for the setting for the Stargate series.
Oh, yes. And
I have a question.
Yeah,
for
go
you.
ahead, Mike. I was just about to say if you had anything to add here, Mike, go ahead.
I have a question for you, Doctor. Do you believe in illegal immigrants or aliens?
Amazing.
That came out wrong. It was supposed to be, do you believe in illegal aliens?
You mean the ones from here or the ones from up there?
I'm kidding.
That reminds me of those old cartoons that used to show some Indians, and they were watching the Mayflower sailing up to the shores of New England, and one of them saying, "Up, here comes another boatload of illegal aliens."
That's incredible.
So, if you're talking about the ones that we're having issues with on the borders here right now, this all has to do with the concept of nation state.
If you want to answer it, that you can, but I was just kidding. So.
Oh, okay.
Yes. And Michael, we definitely are coming to a close here, but I did want you to leave us with any final words of advice for the new generations that are coming up throughout time here. And of course, go ahead and plug anything you like as we let you descend here.
Well, I will say that if anything that I've chatted about this evening has interested you, the easiest way to get more information about it is to poke around in my books, which are all available on Amazon. I think I've got about 16 of them at this point. And if you go to Amazon.com from anywhere in the world and you just look up Michael Aquino as an author, you'll find all these things listed, and you can look inside them all, because they all have the Look Inside feature. They're all available as paperbacks or as electronic Kindle books, so you have that option.
Uh-oh. I think we might have lost him right at the end here.
Who, Mike, doctor?
Yeah.
Uh-oh. Maybe his phone died, because mine was about to die too.
Yeah, I think
you want to call him back or no?
Yeah, I'll call him back right now. We lost him like right at the final moment here.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me give him another call here.
He might not be able to pick up if his phone is dead.
No, his phone's not dead. I think I accidentally...
Oh.
Now, at the tone.
Oh, yeah. I think he didn't even realize that we hung up on him. Or I did on accident there.
Back?
Yeah.
I'll call him back.
Yeah, I'll give him a little ring here again. Yes, I feel bad for doing that. I must have slipped here on the mouse.
He might be still talking.
I know he might be talking and we don't even know. Oh my goodness. Doctor, yes, we totally well, I did. I totally hit the wrong button there.
I was just saying that about 5 years ago I decided that I'd pretty much learned what I was going to learn, and I wanted to start sharing it, and that the books were the best way I could think of to share it. So I wrote these things not because I expected to become a New York Times bestseller, but just to share information, particularly after I croak. And it's going to be a lot harder to reach me by seance than it would than to just read some of these things. So I would say go poke around there, look at the subjects that they're talking about, pick them up and see what I have to say. And if it makes sense, then good. I've helped you out. So that's kind of my 2 cents there.
Very nice.
That's great.
As always, Doctor, I had such a great time having this conversation with you. We covered plenty of ground. This was a great interview. Mike, any final words for the doctor?
I would like to just say to Dr. Aquino, Doctor, it's always an honor to speak with you, sir. I have a lot of respect for you, sir. And so it's a big deal for me to get this opportunity as Michael Deacon lets me come on the program and when you're on, and I'm always so happy to speak with you, and you always fill my head with knowledge, and I just want to say thank you. I hope that your health, it doesn't get any worse, and that everything is okay, and good luck with your life and your wife, and Regis Satanis, sir.
We'll be praying for you, Michael.
Thank you so much. I appreciate all that, and if I've left people with good impressions, then my time here has been well spent. At the end of each day, you have to look at yourself in the mirror and say, have I really, am I an asset to myself and other people, or have I just been a waste of their time and my time? And that's my advice to everybody. Look at yourself at the end of each day. Go in the mirror, take a look. If you like what you see, do more of it. Okay? Okay.
Very nice. We'll be praying for you, Michael.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Michael.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Michael Aquino. Ladies and gentlemen, give him a round of applause. Yes, I could hear it now. Yeah. All right, Michael, thank you so much, my friend. We'll talk to you again on the other side.
Thank you.
All right. Good night, my friend.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
And there he goes, Dr. Michael Aquino. Ladies and gentlemen, another fantastic interview in the books. That was amazing, right, Mike?
Oh, I always have so much fun listening to him speak and conversing with him. The man is, he's got a head full of knowledge. You can't doubt that. Not one bit.
Yeah, he really does. And wasn't this fun? This was a very good interview this time. Having you on here, we were able to cover a lot of ground. We had the callers. I thank all the callers out there for coming in here and asking some pretty good questions.
Yeah, it was quite an interesting night. I think it almost felt like it was just a casual phone call, whereas the last time we interviewed him, which was based on the release of the revised version of the Satanic Bible.
Right.
You know, I had more of an my questions were how would I say this pointed to a certain direction. I wanted answers for the book, but I never really got to get all those questions in. You know, he takes a decent amount of time to define what it is he's talking about and what he's answering to any question. So you don't get just one answer when he answers something.
That's true.
Like one word answer.
I like
that about.
Goes
deep.
Yeah, I like that about him. He really takes the time to really answer everything, and he explains why.
Yep. I got to admit, sometimes like when I read that book, it's deep. It's very deep.
It's very difficult to read. I own several. I think I own two or three of his books, and they all of them are very difficult to decipher. You definitely have to go back and read them a couple times over to really fully grasp what he's explaining to you in his books. And going back to his book, Mindstar, which is just a fantastic book. If you haven't read it yet, Mike, it really goes. Yeah, it goes pretty deep. And so does something like the Diabolicon. Is also another great piece of work. But that's a whole nother different thing.
I can only tell you, when I asked him that question about if he had ever considered writing a version of a Satanic Bible that would be like a story.
Yeah.
I would, because when he wrote the Diabolicon in the second edition of the Satanic Bible by him, he really... he expresses it in such a manner that you're reading this story, and it's like I can picture the images in my head of God and Lucifer and the angels and everybody's talking and they're having a conversation. I thought, oh my God, this is what I want. You know, I want a Satanic Bible that's got stories in it. You know, just like the old Christian Bible.
Oh yes, no doubt. And Mike, we definitely have to wrap up here. I could definitely talk to you for another hour here, no problem. But
likewise,
yeah, we will be hitting that mark pretty soon here. But we'll definitely have to do this again, Mike. I'll bring you on here and we'll knock out a few guests here.
Okay, if I can make just one announcement.
Sure, go ahead.
I'm going to have a new website that's coming up in addition to my MikeHideous.com website. I have one that's coming out with my artwork and photography. It's called HorribleArtwork.com.
Very nice.
HorribleArtwork.com. And it should probably go live in about, what's today, Thursday? I'm going to say by next week it should be fully up. But right now it's still in the works, and it's going to have images of my artwork, my prints of paintings, drawings, photography. And then there's also going to be some things like bed sheets and pillowcases and throw towels and kind of cool stuff like that with my artwork on it.
Oh, I like that.
HorribleArtwork.com.
Very cool. For those that don't know, Mike is actually a very skilled artist as well as a musician. I love a lot of the paintings you have shown me via cell phone there. Lots of good artwork, man. I love that stuff.
Michael, thank you so much for having me. Always a pleasure, and I'm always honored to be on your show. Thank you, sir.
No problem. We'll talk again very soon, my friend.
Okay, buddy. Right. Take care of yourself.
Good night, and mahalo. And there he goes, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank all of you for listening. Remember, you can catch the podcast version of this program on iTunes, Stitcher, Google, Castbox. There's a few more out there. You can find the program on all popular platforms. And thank you over to the Fringe FM. I return Saturday, regular time at 7 p.m. for you West Coasters. That's 9 p.m. Eastern time for you out there. I'd also like to thank you for your patience last week. I dropped the ball. The show was riddled with issues with Dr. E. Michael Jones. I got extremely bothered by it. Normally, I don't exactly get that way, but this time, I was seriously irritated. I guess I do pride myself in putting out a great sounding product. I might even delete that episode from YouTube. But don't worry, Dr. Michael Jones has it up on his channel, chopped up Lorena Bobbitt style. Now we can go out on a low note there. Thanks for being here, boys and girls. I'm Michael Deacon, and with that said, the world is a mysterious place, and life itself is a mystery. Until next time, good night, everybody.